everybody hear me?
That's up.
Excellent. Okay.
To serve the member countries. When it
Here we
comes to
go.
environment data, it's spread. They are the leading environmental body.
So,
comes to
my name is Jan-Bart
technical
Kallewaerts.
support and advice, it is SPC.
And on behalf of all of the co-organisers,
building and knowledge,
which is
it's the
Fugro,
United States.
the European Marine Board,
So that's the start.
the European Marine Observation and Data Network, EMODnet, sorry,
At the regional
IOC-UNESCO and its International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange Program, IODE, the Intertidal Agency, Mercator Ocean International, Flanders Marine Institute, and also on behalf of the co-chairs of the Ocean Decade Data Coordination Group, that's myself and Kate Wing, who is here present with us today. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this side event on global marine data accessibility and interoperability in the framework of the UN Ocean Conference here in Lisbon.
37 or 38.
Now, why is this important, you may wonder? Maybe very obvious, and I've been saying this for many years, and I will keep on saying it probably until I die, or at least until I retire. But it's so important that we keep on repeating it, that we cannot generate any marine knowledge, let alone apply it in our decision making, if we do not first observe the seas and ocean, if we do not collect marine data and manage it in a way that it can be shared and easily found and be used by our engineers, our scientists, our policymakers, and our businesses. There is no digital ocean. There are no reliable outputs of our models and predictions. There will be no useful digital twin applications if we do not secure the foundation first. The foundation is perhaps not always very sexy, and it requires some heavy-duty plumbing at times. But if we don't get it right, our house will not be a pleasant place to live in. Luckily, we are not alone in this, and the Ocean Decade, the UN Ocean Decade, recognizes that the digitization, the sharing and management of data, information and digital knowledge are cornerstones for the success of the decade. And by extension also, the successful implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 14 and its related SDGs. The Decade Implementation Plan therefore calls for the co-design and development of a distributed digital data and information ecosystem which needs to fulfill a number of requirements. And an important one, I don't have the time to go into detail all of the requirements, but one important one is that all stakeholders must be able to access and use and contribute to the digital ecosystem through multiple interfaces that are tailored to their needs and their capacities. We should not leave anyone behind, and we cannot forget about it. It's also very important to realize that no one system or central infrastructure will be able to implement the vision on its own. We will need to act collectively and bring our assets to the table. The UN Decade has set up a data coordination platform and a coordination group to help realize this vision. And it has tasked this group with creating a strategic plan to realize and to work towards a digital ecosystem that is envisaged. This group, which is composed of about 25 experts representing various institutes, organizations, network from both public sector, from the research community, from the private sector, to work together and quite well spread around the globe, to work together to start drafting a strategic plan that will be open for consultation later this year. Next week in Paris we will come together with a core drafting group to set out the first elements of the strategic plan, and we hope to link up with the broader community later this year. Before we start, I would like to share a few reflections based on the preparatory work done by this group, and in particular by Terry McConnell, who used to be the Marine Knowledge Officer at IOC-UNESCO and is now back at Fugro. And There are many ways in which you can look at the marine knowledge value chain, or net if you like. And the most traditional one is look at it as a pyramid from data management to serving knowledge. But if you look at it as an overarching digital ocean knowledge under the form of an iceberg, there is a lot of work that is being done, or that needs to be done below the surface in terms of data collection, data management. The three key components of this digital ecosystem, which build on each other, are the data factory, data collection management, and making the data available, data analytics, processing and generating information and knowledge, and finally, serving the data, information and knowledge to the end users. The last part, on top, which is visible, is the most attractive, the most sexy perhaps, and the part on which we can assign value and return on investment. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg, and it is of no value if we cannot have it fully supported by the underlying less visible parts of the digital ecosystem. In reality, we will not just have one such digital ecosystem but rather many different digital ecosystems, each serving their own purpose with its own requirements and deliverables, each with its own structure and functionalities. Altogether, they will contribute to a vast ocean of digital icebergs, contributing to an overarching digital ecosystem of interoperable parts. And these can be left to float independently, or we can find ways to pull them together into a collective based on common themes and best practices. And if this is what we want, we will need a clear, overarching, interoperable guiding framework, a partnership approach. So, how can we make this work? Let's have a very quick look at the data journey in a generic data ecosystem that starts upstream with the collection, making an observation, that floats through the data management, processing, up to the delivery of key piece of readily usable information or knowledge to an end user. For the purpose of simplifying, it's a very complex process, we can more or less delineate four important blocks: observation, analysis, modeling, prediction, delivery, and the most complex component, the data management. That then forms a unique data ecosystem interconnected in such a fashion that it matches the requirements of the specific users. Today we have many such icebergs, such digital ecosystems serving different projects, different initiatives, different policy requirements or end-user requirements in all parts of the world, covering different themes. Each project enabled with its own sort of interconnected data ecosystem and supported by hundreds, if not thousands, of archives hosting or collecting information and knowledge of our ocean system. So we are really not starting something new. We are building on something that's already been ongoing for decades and for many years. The question is, if it is left unorganized, over time this will become very chaotic. That's why we need to consider taking steps to implement a skeletal framework, an organizational infrastructure using also a top-down approach. So how can we make this work? Under the framework of the UN Ocean Decade, a possible structure to achieve these objectives is to work around communities of practice, around four key themes: observations, data management, analytics and modeling, and applications. Here the intent is not to change the way how science is done, but how we can better coordinate it, to create an ecosystem where ocean data is open, accessible and usable by a vast range of participants. And to make this work, we will need to scale up thematic and regional efforts, lift them up to the global, with interoperability solutions both within and among the different structural components and communities of practice. Several of these structural components are actually already existing or in the making. And they can act as catalyzers for these communities of practice. And I think we are aligning also in the discussions with the different communities, the different bodies that already exist, on how this could be structured. And this is a slide that I received from Enrico Alvarez, who is the technical coordinator of the Decade Coordination Center for Prediction that was recently approved. And it shows that we are aligning on the same structural components and how they can collaborate together and how they can really catalyze the interoperability at the global level. Finally, before I'm handing over the floor to Pierluigi Buttigieg to moderate the first panel, I would like to make just one final observation and take a step back, because we are talking here about data interoperability, and this is very important, but we have to look at it also a little bit broader in terms of interoperability in different aspects. At the end of the day, there are many technical solutions. We have great experts around the globe who will certainly help us to solve some of the technical problems. But at the end of the day, foremost, we need a system to allow interoperability between people, interoperability between organizations, different networks and systems. Also between models and even various digital twin applications which we will see emerge on the top of this data ecosystem in the coming years. So we need a partnership approach combining a top-down guidance and framework with bottom-up generation of interoperability and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, without further ado, I will introduce the first panel. And it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Pierluigi Buttigieg from the Helmholtz Metadata Collaboration Center in Geomar and the panelists.
Thank you, Jan Bart. Testing, testing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now you can hear me. Okay. It's a shame we don't have the saxophone anymore. That would be a nice background. But let's bring up the panelists too. So thank you all very much for coming. This panel is about discussing the interoperability. We have these icebergs floating around. We have very impressive icebergs. We have representatives of some of those icebergs here today from the regions that are integrating national and project level contributions into regional digital presences. Now the question before us is now how do we make this a global system that actually interoperates? We all have measures towards interoperability, but I think our metric for the future, for the decade, is are they interoperating? Can we see the interoperation? Can I query one regional system and get results from another because they can talk to each other so fluently? So that's the theme of this session. We have the minds and the strategists over here with great experience from the Pacific, from Fugro and its global operations, of the Americas represented here, from Europe, and two remote contributions, one from Australia and the other one coming in from South Africa, from Chicana. They couldn't be here, unfortunately, and we couldn't manage to get a live connection, but they have recorded some interventions. We challenged all the panelists here with some questions about how they interoperate, how they connect outside their comfort zone, for example, to the private sector or to other sectoral groups, and other aspects which you'll hear being picked up in the conversation. But we'll start by playing the two remote interventions. We'll just go through those and then pick up themes from there and ask our panelists to then provide comment. There will be a chance for you to ask questions or challenge us to give you responses. So do think about things you'd like to put on the table. But for now, we're just going to kick off with the two remote interventions, please. I think we have a screen down there, so we can watch down there. And I can still hear myself.
Hi everyone, my name is Sebastian Mancini. I'm the director of the Australian Ocean Data Network, a facility in charge of the data management of all the data collected by the IMOS program. IMOS is Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System. It is a research infrastructure funded by the Australian government and has celebrated its 15th anniversary recently. Its mission is to undertake systematic, sustained, scientifically robust observation of Australia's vast and valuable ocean estate. It turns observation into data, time series, product, and analysis that can be used and reused for broad societal benefits. IMOS is led by the University of Tasmania in partnership with several institutions and operating a portfolio of marine observing technologies called facilities, deploying equipment and measuring variables. We collect physical, biological, and biogeochemical data from the open ocean, continental shelf, and coastal area. One of the key successes of IMOS has been the decision of making all the data openly and freely available to the end user. The data is hosted in a centralized data management infrastructure and delivered via different mechanisms. Our existing architecture is based on a number of standards that enables interoperability. There are 5 elements that have been implemented to achieve this. File standards based on self-describing scientific data file format, common data and metadata models such as the Climate and Forecast Convention and the ISO 19195, control vocabularies, web services, and using the suite of standards from the Open Geospatial Consortium, OGC, legal standards such as Creative Commons by attribution license. In addition to all the data being made openly and freely available, all our code for ingesting data in our software tools are made available for our GitHub repository for people to access and reuse. An example is the IMOS toolbox, which aims at converting oceanographic instrument files into quality control IMOS compliant NetCDF files. Moreover, the IODE team is also working closely with the IMOS community in documenting their sampling and analysis protocol, calibration methodologies, data processing and management, and submit these documents to the Ocean Best Practices platform. IMOS is focused around delivering to 5 key areas of societal benefit: marine sovereignty and safety and security, energy security, food security, biodiversity conservation and management, and coastal population. We work to capture instances where IMOS data are being used and who the users are. This allows us to determine use of data in a range of categories, publication, reports, as well as the location and type of users. We can then map the uses of our data across our areas of societal benefit to see how well we are meeting our objectives. We also develop case studies to provide stories and narratives about how our data are used and which of our facilities contribute to meeting the needs of a certain case. We also track use of our data in policy documents, such as, for example, the IPCC report, and as they relate to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Also, in the past few months, we have implemented a user registration mechanism on the IODE portal to better understand the needs of our users. This feature is currently optional, but will most likely be mandatory in the future in order to establish a stronger relationship with different user groups. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Good, thank you. That's the intervention from Sebastian Mancini from IMOS in Australia. And now we'll move over to South Africa, to Chikana, for his intervention on their very impressive system on that continent. Chikana. This is a recording, so I'm not actually talking to him. I thought it would be much smoother than it actually is. But.
Good evening, my name is Chikana Rasishone. I'm the South Africa's Marine Information Management System Manager, short for MEMS, and I'm also the Afro-based node and data manager for the Sub-Saharan Office community. First of all, MEMS is an institutional data repository for South Africa's coastal and marine data and metadata. It was developed with the purpose of ensuring long-term archival and preservation of all marine data that are generated nationally and regionally, and to also make this data openly available and accessible to the broader community while we encourage and promote scientific collaboration. In terms of answering the second question that deals with how MEMS is interoperable with other regions, it is important to note that MEMS was developed as an agnostic system with the purpose of achieving interoperability with regional and international marine data services. It was built to support free and open access for marine data, and in so doing, it is a gateway to South Africa's marine coastal data. To achieve interoperability, MEMS has developed regional common standards for metadata and data formats. For example, we have developed biological data metadata record using the DAWINCO ecological metadata language so that the data can be published and shared through the international data bodies such as the OBIS and the GEOGRAPH. We also use sharing protocol which comprise of persistent and unique DOIs for discovery and citation of the data. Furthermore, we also use automation of data workflows which are fully compliant with fair principle. On a regional level, we work with the Angola Current Commission for the development of an integrated regional geoportal which uses MEMS as a blueprint for development. In terms of the second question that deals with how MEMS connects with the private sector in terms of data collection and sharing, it is important to note that MEMS works closely with the private sector agencies, which include the ecotourism, fishing industry, and the whale watching, as well as the various non-government and non-profit organizations for data collection and sharing. For example, the whale watching industry and various other NPOs and NGOs do use our in-house codes and developed application to record at sea observation, which then relay and update data on MEMS in real time. A similar application is being utilized by our local fishermen in an effort to promote sustainable use of green living resources, which in then record all their fish catches and upload the fish catches data onto MEMS in real time. In turn, the MEMS then develop and generate data products to all these marine users, which they can utilize for their own at-sea operational activity. This relationship has proved very beneficial to both the private sector, NPOs, and the non-governmental organizations, as well as to us as a scientific organization. I thank you.
Right, thank you very much. So already we've encountered some thoughts, ideas, concepts from the Australian and South African region. This is already exciting. We've heard lots of technical advancements, ability to share data, developing agnostic systems ready to project data out into the world, and also inclusion of different stakeholders in the design of those systems. Very much like Jan Bart said, it's a people problem as much as anything else. We need that global agreement about what these systems are for. And those thoughts we will pick up with our panelists here. So first, perhaps just to get to know them, let's do a short introduction, your institution, your interests, your take on interoperability and participation in the decades. Kate, would you kick us off?
Okay, thank you very much, Pierluigi. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Kate Larkin. I'm the Deputy Head of EMODnet Secretariat, which is the European Marine Observation and Data Network. EMODnet is a European marine data service. It's a public service which has been going more than a decade now. It's funded by the European Commission, European Maritime and Aquaculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. And it's the most comprehensive, today, it's the most comprehensive in situ marine data service in Europe. And what do I mean by that? It's basically all of the data that are collected in water across all marine environmental variables, and also including human activities data. It's a service that's offering access to integrated data layers of all of these marine environmental and human activities information, and it's also delivering added value products which are quite generic but then stimulate innovation across European and global users. So at EMODnet, from the beginning, if I talk about interoperability, there has been a drive to collect the data once and then use it many times. So from the beginning, the different domain experts that are involved in EMODnet, this is over 120 organizations, hundreds of experts across Europe, they've been using their thematic expertise to really drill down to what the conventions or the formats or the standards of each of these thematic areas is. And then as a community, they've been deciding how to make the data interoperable so that we can bring data from industry, from civil society, from research, from monitoring for legislative purposes. How can we bring these all together and make these integrated, harmonized maps that can then be used for European policy, Marine Strategy Framework Directive, for example, or operations at sea, and many other applications which I can speak to later. So EMODnet has grown from a sort of community bottom-up, and the interoperability at the beginning has been very much thematically driven. Then if I just mention, EMODnet is now at a stage where it's doing a big technical upgrade. It's already working very well with the Copernicus Marine Service, for example, in Europe. Together, Copernicus Marine Service and EMODnet are delivering the European marine data space. But because of the digital transition, because of the expanding user community, we're now working much more together towards full interoperability. And from the EMODnet perspective, what EMODnet is doing is stepping up its technical upgrade, and it's centralizing all of the metadata, the data that describes, the information that describes the data. It's centralizing it into a GeoNetwork and a metadata catalog, so that for the user, you're going to have a much more simple experience. You'll eventually, by the end of this year, in fact, be able to go to EMODnet, select a region that you're interested in, and draw upon all of the 7 very large thematic areas of EMODnet and find the data that you want. And that's only possible because the metadata describing the data will be fully centralized. So that's the next step that's coming for interoperability for EMODnet.
Great, thank you. And then again, we hear another region getting the house in order, so to speak, understanding what it needs to supply to its interest groups and stakeholders, and then being ready then to have a more centralized, flexible way to arrange that data for further interoperability on a global scale. So with that then, let's take a shift of gear towards the private sector, and from Fugro, Ben, what's your take? What do you do? What's your take on interoperability, and how do you make it work in such a complex organization?
Yes, thank you, Pierluigi. Ben Williams with Fugro. I'm the MetOcean Director for the Americas region. Fugro is a Dutch multinational operating in 59 countries with 9,000 employees, spreading land and marine activities. My responsibility specifically sits in the Americas region, covering Canada to Argentina, both on the Atlantic and Pacific side. So a vast portion of the oceans. I've been with Fugro about 17 years, and in this path, I started 17 years ago, and data interoperability used to be carrying the floppy disk back with you off the helicopter from an oil rig to hand it to somebody's desk to allow them to process data. So we have an easy time criticizing where we are now with systems, but I think we need to appreciate the path that we've been on over the last 2 decades to get us to the position we are in today. I'm excited to mention a recent partnership that Fugro has announced with EMODnet themselves in sharing some of the bathymetric data. Many people are aware of Fugro's contributions to Seabed 2030 over the last years, donating almost 2 million square kilometers of bathymetric data collected in between project sites and making this publicly available with JEBCO and Nippon Foundation. We're going to continue building on that relationship with not only bathymetric data, but MetOcean data, as well as MetOcean metadata, working together with EMODnet, not just in the European sector, but across the globe. I can perhaps talk about a couple of projects that I'm most proud about, and it really typifies the changing of thinking. So in industry, we've intentionally not had interoperable data, right? We don't want to spend a lot of money collecting data for a project site and then just give it away to someone for free. That would be crazy. Why would anybody want to do that? But what we've looked at, and what I've worked closely with my clients on is subsampling, desampling, and when possible, sharing all the data into the public space. Fugro's data structure is set up from decades to keep that data private and protect the interests of our clients. So we've had to look for ways, whether utilizing EMODnet, utilizing NOAA's IU's platforms, to deliver that data into the public sector at an agreed a resolution or operation. Specifically, we saw from the UK Hydrographic Office recently, in a presentation yesterday from IHO, the vast data collection that they're making across the Caribbean islands. The majority of that data is actually Fugro collected data. I had an idea when I started working with the hydrographic team, providing tide gauges in late 2017 to support these projects. We'd get a tender and need to respond with a 30-day tide gauge survey to support the hydrographic work. I said, that's not good enough. Like, we're going to the Caribbean. We have a Caribbean network of tide gauges. Why are we taking a 30-day measurement, spending all this money, this carbon footprint to send people there, install a tide gauge, then a massive carbon footprint to go and remove all? Why don't we just install permanent gauges, tie them into the Caribbean tsunami network, and make that data publicly available? And I think it takes this systematic change in thinking to bring us into a data interoperability space that we all want to live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good words. And I think from the UNESCO point of view, it's very interesting, because as much as this is about data and science and technology, it's cultural changes And we're hearing echoes of that. We speak different languages, we have different stakeholders, shareholders, customers, policymakers, etc. But the spirit of it tends to gravitate to the same thing. We need to be ready to share when the time comes, when a natural disaster strikes, when the data is needed. We have to be poised to do that, even if we're still negotiating the legal aspects of it or the contractual aspects of it. Thank you very much, Ben. Moving on to Hans. So in the Pacific, once again, what do you do and how are you interoperating in that region, and how are you getting ready then for global interoperation?
Thank you, Pierre. Bula Binaka from Fiji. I'm excited to be here. Yes, so I work for the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Oceania Regional Office, and we support a number of countries in the region, working very closely with the crop agencies, basically to support large ocean states, which is about more than 40 million of square kilometers of water out there if you look at it. But in terms of our approach to data interoperability, managing of data, first of all, for me, when I look at when in terms of defining data interoperability, has to be well managed, accessed, can be exchanged, and again, it has to be utilized so that there's an outcome out of it. And for us, the work that we do in the Pacific, through integrated ocean management and through the lens of marine spatial planning, we work very, very closely with what is known the Council of Regional Crop Agencies. So basically, these includes the Secretariat of Pacific Environment Programs, PREP, and also we work very closely with the Pacific community. And when it comes to capacity building and knowledge, we work very closely with the universities around the region. And that is our approach at the regional level. When it comes down to the national level, then we work with these regional crop agencies to try and build systems at the national level, so that countries, in fact, the reasons why these crop agencies exist is because of the member states. They were created so that they can serve these member states. So we work with the crop agencies so that data systems can be created at the national level, so that all the data that exists at the regional and global level can be used for national planning processes. So that's how we've done it in the Pacific, and to go down to another level at the community level, that is another story. We don't have the systems in place to kind of go. The only way we do it is actually to go down manually, and go and do consultations with the communities. We try and bring all those data into maps or into paper and take it down to the community level, so that translate it to their dialect, whatever, depending on which country you're working in, so that is used at that level as well. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Right. Thank you very much, Hans, for that. So this is already, we see the data pulls of all of these systems, regional stakeholders, requirements, customers, etc. And things are shaped according to that pull and what technology capacities exist. But then to the panel, one of the questions that we really want to challenge you with, even today, all of these wonderful things exist, but I cannot query one system and query across all of them. What do we need to change for that to happen? So I think I'll start with Kate with that on the EMODnet side. You're centralizing, you're getting the data in order to a very high degree. Semantic interoperability, low-level, data-level interoperability, formats, etc. It's getting very clean. And now what does it take to then talk to SPREP, to talk to IMOS, to talk to the South African nodes?
So for the last few years, EMODnet has been represented on global dialogues through IODE, for example, the Oceanographic Data Exchange, and also through the Developing Ocean Information Hub, where different regions are coming together already to share their experience, to share conventions, best practices, and to discuss about this data interoperability. So for EMODnet, As you said, we're scaling up and simplifying the way that data can be searched and discovered and visualized. We are offering across the board now web services which are not just for a person to search and discover, but really machine-to-machine discovery as well. That did already exist in some of the EMODnet thematics, but it will be now across the board. And exactly raising the game of the metadata. We already have international ISO standards that EMODnet follows for metadata, but there still can be more to be done, and especially sharing that knowledge across different regions and realizing what other groups from South Africa, from Australia, and the US, etc., are all doing is really important, so that we can then have this minimum set of metadata that can then be interoperable across the world.
I think that's interesting. Again, so I also work with the Ocean Info Hub. I'm the technical lead there, so declaring. But I think the magic there was it's just a specification. It's not a system. It's a specification that people can change in order to project their data and share it. I think that's often what we're missing. SPREP is also connected to that same system, and it's very basic right now. But it's more that spirit of sharing. If the houses are getting in order, then it's much easier then to say this is the global convention. But are you then meeting? Are the regional infrastructures, the IMOSs of the world, the SPREPs, the IUCN networks, EMODnet, do we have some sort of ocean multi-basin scale agreement between the regional infrastructures, or a forum that you can reliably say these are our interoperability specifications for the various neighbors? Do we have that yet, Kate? Or is it more ad hoc? It's more other processes, right?
I believe up to now it's under this context of IODE and the Developing Ocean Information Hub, but I think the Ocean Decade is a huge opportunity to scale this up. There's a lot of bilateral discussions and then within these contexts, but I think a lot more could be done.
That's the interesting part. So then going over to you, Ben, you talked about the sort of return on investment of interoperability. As a private sector entity, what is the return on investment that would actually say, well, yes, this is actually interesting. We're going to talk to our customers about the value of interoperability, maybe open, maybe semi-closed, maybe protected data, but data is a living thing. You send it out there, it gets linked to other data, its value increases. So what's your consciousness there now? Because that eventually will plug into the same framework that we're talking about, the regional infrastructures with fully open data. How do we negotiate that space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's multiple levels to sort of unpack there, and at a data level where we are collecting data, we are sharing data in real time. We're trying to make steps. We're trying to play nicely with the frameworks that do exist. We're engaging with our clients, whether it's a sustainability goal for the clients to be contributing to ocean science, whether it's a stakeholder engagement for deployment of a LiDAR buoy for a renewable site, and perhaps getting the fishermen to see the value of some surface winds, some waves, some current data at that location can mitigate vandalism and issues that we've historically suffered at the hands of a failure to engage with stakeholders. So going beyond that into the metadata realm and being able to share metadata is really where we can get to a point where we can better control how the data is being used in the future. So providing a past experience of where Fugro has collected all the data, or one of Fugro's competitors has collected the data, without actually making that data available, might go to serve a purpose that we are completely unaware of. And providing that access and starting that dialogue and bringing some context around the metadata and understanding its onward use sits a lot more comfortable with my clients than freely sharing.
Yeah, no, I think that also picks up. We have the same situation also in the public sector, also in the regions, but it's slightly differently molded. If we're sharing data across our infrastructures, of course we don't want to duplicate it, and we want the acknowledgement that the infrastructure is being used. We heard from Sebastian and IMOS, the tracking of the usage of the data. That's how you justify the existence of these things that cost a lot of money to run. So the idea of being able to point to somebody that either has the data or has declared that they have the data. Maybe it's not open, maybe you have to negotiate. This also works with indigenous data products. You have to be aware that it exists, but then you have to reach an agreement about fair use, etc. So it's a similar framework, and I think that's what we're hitting on in the Decade Strategic Coordination Group and other entities that are trying to make this work. What are the common themes that is going to glue this together? We heard from Shikana and the South African case, having the private sector at the table when they're designing their outputs, when they're designing the whole infrastructures. Are you involved in that on the private sector thing, to be at the table when the design phase is happening, such that that you know the needs, the specifications, the standards that need to be shared?
To a certain degree in the NOAA framework, but probably in isolation, the NOAA framework. I do sit on the board of directors at Maricus, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems, part of NOAA's IOS network, and I'm a member of GCOOS, the equivalent for the Gulf Coast. Participating in these and being engaged in these conversations and quarterly meetings does help us mold and have a seat at the conversation. I think it's important to note as well that vast majority, if not all, of this data that we have an interest in making interoperability, specifically in ocean observations, is not lying with the end client. Right? The data is not sitting in the Shells, the Equinors, the Avangrids, the Iberdrolas data archives. It's sitting in the Fugros, the RPSs, and our competitive landscape of ocean observers. And these are the ones who have to be engaged. These are the ones that are discussing CF convention standards, self-describing NetCDF files, and also the ones that hold this large archive of data that we may have delivered that report, but this is where the conversation of interoperability really starts.
And that's also where the sort of the economics of it start, in a sense. In the private sector, of course, we know that there are proprietary formats, things that you need a product to actually work with, or you buy a machine and it will have a proprietary data output. The same somehow emerges in regional infrastructures, because you develop a whole suite of technology around your data products. It's not just the data itself, but the technology around it that makes it interoperable. And so it's interoperable at the regional scale, but not the global one. That's the need for this. In the Pacific case, you have so many small island developing states, but you could say large ocean states too, that are gathering this data there. That's a microcosm of this global problem. How do you reach agreement? How do you reach agreement to then federate into SPREP or SPC or other networks?
Yeah, so as I've said, the reason those crop agencies exist is because of the members. It's through the leaders, the Pacific leaders meeting that, once the leaders agree, and then that's really, it goes down to those regional crop agencies to kind of work on those decisions from the leaders. But in terms of the way it's set up, it's very basic at the moment. If you think about, when environmental data is with SPREP, it's very basic, and if it's technical data that is needed, it sits with SPREP at the moment. But even all these different systems, sometimes they don't talk to each other. And I think through the Decade of Ocean Science, now we have the Pacific Community Center for Oceans Science, with the Pacific community. And that's something that we're trying to use to connect back to the global system.
Okay, that's again very good to hear, that coordination at the regional scale, and it's in a way good that it's starting out and it's still minimal, because then that gives everyone the opportunity to sort of tweak their systems and tune to each other. So it's very timely, and in a sense it's what has been said earlier in terms of the need for that coordination in the decade. So it's good we're talking about this. People are getting their data on the web, they're making it linked and open, and there are APIs, standards. We've heard the same standards being mentioned across the infrastructures. Things like Darwin Core that go to OBIS, things like the ISO standards, etc. But just because you use a standard doesn't automatically make it interoperable. People can use standards in very different ways. So I think that's where we need that consensus too. We're almost at time. We have about 8 minutes left or so to wrap up. We do want to see if there's questions from the audience, so do think about that, prepare that. Are there any immediate questions out there? Lots of terminology, but any immediate questions that you'd like to ask? All right, if not, prepare it, think about it, or challenges that you'd like to make to us. And in the meantime, let's then look at the idea of So one thing that came up in some of our preparatory questions was the trust in data. Each one of the regions has different ways of quality controlling what they share. I was talking to Chikana about it in South Africa. You know, when you come to a data product that advises policy, they want to know it's not just random data that's been put in from different kinds of studies, but there is some sort of common quality control. I know EMODnet has quality control and curation, and SPREP also does, to just make sure it's technically sound and then substantively sound. But I believe you're all using different metrics for quality control. Is that the case? Are we interoperable in the way we communicate how trustworthy data is yet or not yet?
I could pick up an example from EMODnet chemistry to give you, which is a regional example, but then with a sort of global context and global use now. So EMODnet chemistry collects and integrates data from a very wide range of chemical, marine environmental parameters, but one of the areas is marine litter. Now this, 5 years ago in Europe, there was a huge amount of data, but it couldn't be used for European policy because it was not harmonized. And so what EMODnet chemistry did was work with the Commission, with the Joint Research Centre and the technical expert groups that they have for European directives like the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and they collaborated and shared expertise on best practices, on conventions, and they harmonized 300 beaches or more's worth of marine litter data, which was otherwise useless basically for policy. And now EMODnet chemistry can offer these integrated data layers, which are used for the descriptor 10 of MSFD. And so EMODnet chemistry has become the sort of reference point,
and where's that trust metric? Where's that quality control metric? It's in the metadata. It's embedded there to say that this is...
It's embedded in the metadata, but the quality and the sort of categorization, let's say, of the marine litter was really important. And that was because it was done between EMODnet chemistry thematic experts and technical experts coming together from the European Commission. They could share the experience and come to a common understanding. Okay. And then that was a sort of European standard. And the reason I was mentioning global is that since 2021, through the Ocean Best Practice System of IOC, of UNESCO, there's been a dialogue with the Global Marine Litter Partnership. And so now these data are not only useful for European users, which was the primary sort of aim, but now can be picked up at the global, and that's part of the dialogue of, okay, how do we characterize marine litter globally?
And that again is that microcosm, getting it in order at the regional scale, pushing it up to a global network, and then seeing what it takes by invitation of other regions to make sure that's fit for purpose for their purposes as well, for everybody's, gamut purposes. And Fugro, I assume you're completely integrated with your levels of quality controlled information across all your operations?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
But why would we want to be? Quite often we have the unique challenge of working for clients with organizations. Total, for example, requires for physical oceanographic measurement SIMROC to be utilized as their QC portal, or QC standard. The majority of US clients are expecting a Quartod standard from NOAA. And so we have to be sort of fluent in all of these quality control routines, and of course need to be able to address this. I think one of the key important factors that we find is QC cannot clean the data. QC needs to flag the data. We've seen many cases where we have environmental risks, squalls in West Africa that you could clean out based on rate of change, important data that is environmental impacts on assets at sea. So important to flag data more than clean it.
More than clean it.
And the metadata to contain what flagging standard has been used.
Exactly. If we do that, if we flag data or we come up with our coordination group to flag the quality of it, that's very powerful because you don't always need the cleanest data. Sometimes you just need some data, but you need to know what you're working with, from citizen scientists up to highly calibrated systems. So it's a very, very interesting perspective. So I think I'm looking for any hands right now. Or okay, we have 2 hands. Gentleman in the corner there on the right.
Hi, Steve Diggs, Scripps Institute for Oceanography, and on the Data Coordination Committee. This is going to get me kicked off.
Go for it.
So I think building off of something that my colleague Matthew Belbiak said earlier is that we make a lot of assumptions and take a lot of things for granted. And one of the things we take for granted is that we have some degree, some percentage of all of the ocean observations captured that we are working with. We're making those interoperable. We're really only working with the data sets that we know about.
Yeah.
And with the people that I work with, they're having trouble finding the data because there's such a high degree of expertise that's needed to even know where to start looking. We don't address that problem. I don't quite understand why. Maybe because we're so siloed, but also maybe because it's just not a glamorous enough problem. And I think that the introductory remarks that were so well stated actually touched upon that some of the work is just not glamorous. And I still believe that we can make a complete inventory of everything from the last 20 years if we just funded it and went after it. And we could worry about quality control and interoperability later, because it would give us the real landscape of what we're trying to make interoperable rather than just what we know.
Yeah, no, good point. The first step towards interoperability is at least knowing it's there. And I think that's the case because we're looking at things that, as you mentioned, Kate, we've already detected, elevated, standardized, operationalized. Then they're in regional infrastructures. There's a whole innovation layer, science of stuff that's still unruly. It's a bit chaotic, but it still has to be on the landscape so we can think about the interoperability steps later. Point well taken.
Yeah. I mean,
very briefly, because I think we have a minute or less.
Yeah, I could comment further that we have seen examples, the National Academy of Sciences on understanding Gulf Ocean systems, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico basin, had a very good initiative to try and unlock that data and engage quite well across the physical oceanographic stakeholders to unlock and plug in some of that data and make it available.
Yeah.
The challenge there being sustaining funding.
So I think that's it. Unlock it, put it on the radar, and then get people to figure out the interoperability, and then that bottom-up process starts within a coordination framework. So unfortunately, we have to wrap up at this stage. So just a few closing remarks. We have a lot of work to do. We have a framework to do that work within, though, which is very encouraging. You see regional hubs gathering up that data, but again, this is one layer of the interoperability. We have to make that operational layer work through the private sector, to the public sector, to everything in between. But we also need the other layers. Things that people who are just generating data from their group and putting it on a website, that should be able to be detectable too in this system, so that we have an awareness, a machine-driven awareness system of what's out there, and then we can have a better filter into the operational infrastructures. It's all there. We're thinking about this. We'll be in Paris at UNESCO HQ next week to think about this a little bit further. And if you have input, please do contact us, or Jan Bart and Kate as chairs of that, and we're more than happy to hear your considerations, challenges, concerns, or thoughts. So that's it, I think. We're done, and then we'll hand over then. So Jan Bart, thank you all very much, the panelists.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So we now have a short intermezzo, intermediate between the two panels. We have two video contributions with a few more examples of regional and thematic data collaborations. The first one is by Kevin O'Brien from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States, who talk about science data integration, World Ocean Database, and other examples of successful interoperability solutions for data exchange. And then the second contribution by video is by Dr. Qiu Jiang, I hope I pronounced that well, from the National Marine Data and Information Service, NMDIS of China, and is also the project coordinator of ODIN Westpac, that's the Regional Ocean Data and Information Network for the Western Pacific region. In China, NMDIS is coordinating this effort under the framework of the International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange Program, IODE. So I'll ask the technical staff to roll the videos, and I think the panelists from the second panel are already set up, so that's perfectly fine. Okay, thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Kevin O'Brien, and I'm from the University of Washington and currently acting as the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, Observations Coordination Group Vice Chair for Data and Information. Today I'd like to give a bit of an overview on recent and upcoming data activities within GOOS and OCG, and some thoughts about successes and challenges that we've faced. As part of the process to understand how best to enhance our data system, OCG took on the task of attempting to map data flows across the OCG networks. This includes the global networks such as Argo, the Ship Observations Team, and many more. The goal of this effort was to really identify gaps and opportunities where we could move OCG data flows towards higher FAIR compliance. As noted in the slide, the first iteration of the maps is complete, and we will now be working to validate each map with their relevant networks, extend the data mappings with the International Oceanographic Data Exchange and WMO to include things like the Global Synthesis Products and National Data Archives. In addition, these maps are helping to form the basis for the OCG recommendations and upcoming data implementation strategy. From the data mapping effort, we have developed a list of recommendations for improving data flows and interoperability of data collected through the global networks. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I just wanted to provide the documentation to them through this slideshow. There's also more detailed documentation available, and this will be uploaded to the GOOS website soon if it hasn't been already. These recommendations, which have been presented to the global networks, will form the OCG data implementation plan, which will be released later this year. I was also asked to think about some successes and challenges that we have faced. There's not a lot of time to discuss these, but I did come up with 5 brief things that I noted some of the more advanced networks and projects had in common. A strong and active data management team helps identify and implement the required changes which move a data network towards higher FAIR compliance. Data best practices are another thing, and these are important, and they seem to be more effective when scientists and data managers work together. Networks and projects that leverage existing standards and conventions that allowed for more efficient growth in those network projects with fewer resources. In this data-hungry world, we tend to think about data users, but it's just as important to design and implement data systems that support the data producers. They need flexible tools that reduce their data management burden rather than adding to it. And none of this is possible without FAIR data services that support both human and machine interactions, and there are some extremely excellent FAIR compliant tools available now to help solve this problem. In terms of some of the challenges we've faced, I could mention several things like forcing everyone to use complicated data formats, or developing vocabularies in a vacuum that aren't interoperable, or requiring logins for access to data and metadata. But data managers are aware of all these challenges. And this is the UN Ocean Decade. It's supposed to be about transformation, revolution. So I'm going to mention just one thing that I believe could bring about significant change, and that is to rethink how data management is funded. Too often the funding for data management is lumped into the science project. However, this often only supports the very basic data management needed and does not address higher levels of data management that is required to successfully interoperate among diverse communities, especially as we have across the UN. There is a critical need to directly fund data teams and experts to attack these interoperability issues. And this interoperability is crucial in order to support the development of the digital ecosystem, which will underpin all of the activities and programs of the UN Ocean Decade. That is all the time I have. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great meeting.
In an effort to promote the communication and cooperation on marine data management and sharing services among Western Pacific member states, National Marine Data and Information Service of China has been operating ODIN-WESPAC Marine Data and Information Sharing System since 2017. In February 2019, we released the new version of ODIN-WESPAC system to provide more friendly and convenient sharing services. Currently, the system provides 5 kinds of sharing services: observation data, regional products, marine features, marine literature, and experts and institutions. 72 datasets and metadata shared by China have been integrated in the system, covering hydrology, meteorology, biology, chemistry, and other subjects, and 6 kinds of data products like marine economy, ocean reanalysis data, atlases, etc. Now, the number of data lists is close to 240,000, with a total volume 429 gigabytes. Users can not only retrieve data according to search conditions conveniently, but also view the spatial temporal distribution and make customized graph-illustrated products on a map directly. Focused on the scientific hotspots, the system included 3 featured topics on blue economy, sea level rise, tide and tidal current forecasting, and provided related news and trends, scientific data, research reports, and other knowledge-based sharing services. In the marine literature module, the system released the full paper of Marine Science Bulletin, published by NMDAS since 2007, and abstracts of degree dissertations, meeting proceedings, and journal dissertations, totaling more than 5,000 items. The system also collected more than 4,000 ocean experts and 1,000 institutions' information in the Western Pacific region. In the ODE-WESPAC system, users could access all the data and metadata safely and conveniently by downloading, subscription, and customized services. Different from the traditional file management mode, the new system manages the data in a multi-dimensional classification approach, including space, time, parameters, and observation instruments to cater for users' needs preferably. In order to facilitate marine data exchange and sharing among the member states, we specially developed a data updating and sharing portal. Within the system framework, the submitted data could be easily managed and visualized. Thank you for your contribution on the data sharing and exchange. Hand in hand, let's work together.